All right, all right, all right. I think we're live, family. Greetings, everybody. This is Rasa Angola Tafari.
And I'm Jenna, and welcome to
People Talking Kali. Yeah, we did that right on time. All right. We got a great guest in the house tonight. Personal friend, great instructor, good brother, Madasna Guru, Njoli Brown. Got a long history together, Jenna and I, and brother Njoli. A beautiful history via Kali and how our paths cross and intersect in Capoeira. Hopefully that can come by. But I just want to take a moment and introduce this brother because we have a lot of respect for him. He's a very humble guy. He has a lot of programs going on that are Kali / warrior / Capoeira related. And I'm just so glad he's here to do the show. So if you're here tuning in right now, our special guest this evening, Madasna Guru and Njoli Brown. How you doing, good brother?
Good. Thank you for having me on the show. Good to be with y'all.
Yeah, I was trying to make it plain like Brother Malcolm says, but it's a good opportunity to speak on a lot of good works that you do, good brother. And hopefully we can unpackage that as things go on. Just first and foremost, with all our guests, we do a status check. How you doing? Where are you at in the world right now? And how you doing with our present lockdown situation?
I was saying I'm in New York, which an interesting thing, obviously, to be in a space that is one of the epicenters for a lot of the going-ons, obviously. That's an interesting thing, but that being, I feel like I'm still doing all right. Staying in connection with people, I'm still teaching, I'm still working, I'm still training, my mental and emotional fortitude is doing all right. So in that regards, I'm good. And soon I'm going to be heading out to the West Coast in just over a month, I guess about a month and a half. So although out here I'm getting a little bit of time outdoors, I'm sure the quality and the difference in being outdoors once I'm closer to the ocean and out in the mountains and everything else will also kind of elevate me some. So, all things considering, I think I'm doing okay.
Hey, that's great. That's great to hear, good brother.
Yes.
All right, so for the folks are already tuning in. We got some of our regulars already. Brother Royce with the Nomads, Mandela Lamont is tuning in. Ali Johnson from Chicago, and of course the Elite family, who we want to speak about. All right, let's get started. For those who don't know you, brother Njoli, how did you get into Kali? And what got you specifically into Pakiti Tirji Kali? How'd that happen?
Let's see. Well, so I've been interested in Kali, or what I thought was Kali, for a long time. Even before, kind of in my early time in martial arts, I did jujitsu, traditional Japanese jujitsu, all when I was young, and I wrestled all in high school and college. But even in that early era, and I don't know if it was an 80s or 90s movie. Did you guys ever see that movie, The Perfect Weapon?
Oh, yes. Oh, of course. Yeah. Is that Jeff Speakman?
Yeah.
Okay.
With the high jeans with the acid wash joints and the no belt and the tank top tucked in.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I feel like he might have been a Kajukembo guy or something like that. But anyway, in a lot of his movies, he would do a lot of stick work. And I remember just being like, yo, that's really beautiful and really interesting to see. And, I never had time to fit that into my work, but it was always something that was kind of in the back of my mind. And then, just in more recent years, really, I'd had some small interactions with it, but really once I moved back to New York, I finally had opportunities to connect with Kali or Screamer, Anis, that kind of thing. Originally with Lightening Scientific and with a group called Kuntal Kali Cruzada, and then had some time in the Philippines where I was living out there for a couple of years. And so I was training there. And yeah, it kind of grew from that. I was doing Lightning Scientific there and really specifically spending that time with Grandmaster Vic Sanchez, and then also built in the Bikini Tirsha once I kind of had an inroad to that through Tuhon Kit.
Okay, didn't even mean to interrupt, because I've heard of Lightning Scientific along the way, and it's an awesome name. But it's not like we were saying. It sounds like something.
Superpower.
Sounds like
Right.
a RZA produced track, But
Yeah, right.
tell me a little bit more about Lightning. What was the bridge from Lightning Scientific, and how did that get you to PTK and Mandala Tuhon Kit?
So while I was out in New York, I finally found this space opening where I could do another martial art. I was so deep involved with capoeira and everything I was doing with that I really didn't have a lot of like intellectual, academic space in my life to be able to do another thing. And then finally I got to a point where I was like, oh, I can breathe in that way. And so I got involved with a group that was doing a mix of things. They were doing Lightning Scientific, they do modern arnis, they would do some striking stuff from boxing, they were doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so they were doing a mixture of things. And I still have a really great relationship with them. But I really enjoyed Lightning Scientific, which is generally more of a long-range fighting system, I would say, whereas some people might delve into Ilustrísimo, is the thing that really fulfills the long range part of their practice. Lightning Scientific might do that for another person. And so that was the thing for me. Lightning Scientific was really beautiful in that it was long range and it was also bladed oriented. And so when I had the chance to go and live and work in the Philippines, I was working there doing youth development work, and my partner at the time also was in women's reproductive health. So we were both out there kind of involved in a lot of other work. I got to focus on spending my mornings with Grandmaster Vic Sanchez, who was, really a profound teacher, just an older gentleman who, was a direct student of, Grandmaster Benjamin Luna Lima, and really had his own heart about it. I feel like a lot of times, even when we see a lot of people who are in that line of Lightning Scientific, maybe their exposure isn't as much with Grandmaster Vic, but what made him really profound was his openness. He also, even before his experience with Lightning Scientific, had a lot of time in modern arnis and directly with women presas. He had a lot of cinco tiros exposure. That was his primary practice. He was in that old movie, The Stick Fighter, he was a really amazing person. And I remember I would spend all the mornings, I would take a car and go all the way out to this area called Marikina, deep out there, this stadium out in Marikina in the Philippines, kind of close to Manila, and spend all the mornings with him. And we would do these 3-hour sessions in the morning, 4-hour sessions in the morning, of which an hour of them would be a lot of storytelling. It would be a lot of him just talking about life, talking about his past. When I would tell him I was gonna go and spend a whole bunch of time in, different parts of the Philippines, he'd be like, oh yeah, well, when you go to this area, you should make sure that you're wearing a yellow shirt, because yellow has this specific alignment with this spiritual energy that you need to make sure you do that. And if you go to this tree, watch out for this particular spirit. You need to walk around that tree to the left, 3 times in the counterclockwise direction. And I just remember being word, there's guys who can teach you how to strike and how to throw a number 1 and blah, 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 hit all this stuff. But there's a value in being able to spend time with an elder who can, one, talk to you about a period of time when they didn't practice just because it was fun on Saturday. Like they practiced because they were like, oh, I need to learn this thing for my living and for my survival. And the other thing was that he felt like it was of equal importance for him to talk about this cultural reference as it was for him to talk about the martial reference of the art he was teaching. And I remember thinking that was really beautiful. And so I was living in Manila, I was based in Manila. And another friend told my partner, like, oh, we know this guy out there named Kit who teaches, some Filipino martial arts too. We don't know what it's called, but he teaches some Filipino martial arts. And my partner at the time was like, I knew a guy named Kit. I just know him from like the beach, kind of kicking it, surfing, like playing ultimate frisbee. Like that can't be the same dude. And it turns out it is the same guy. I knew him from Boracay like years before. And I started going in the mornings to Grandmaster Vic, and then I would go in the evenings and go and train with, at that time it was Mandala Kit at Kali Salcedo, like down in this racquetball court. And I really loved the fact that it was like close range. So it was like a contrast to this long range work I was doing. He was teaching close range, a lot of blade, the stuff that I'm most scared of.
Yeah. Wow.
I feel like you need to train the thing that frightens you the most, the thing that like takes you aback and makes you a little, uncomfortable. And I need to spend the most time in that range and in that work. And Tuhon Kid just had a really beautiful way of teaching that I was like, oh, I want to dedicate to that. And when I came back to the States after that, I felt by that time, I was like, I want to really dedicate myself to that practice and kind of spend time in that practice. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely beautiful. Folks, if you are just tuning in, we have a very special guest, our brother, MNG and Njoli Brown here, currently from New York, the New York Elite Group. But he was just giving us his very beautiful history of, being introduced to PTK Unity in the Philippines, and also training Lightening Scientific. We have some people who have checked in as well. Again, we have your wonderful comrades in the elites have checked in, and of course some other comrades in the Nomad group. However, we also have Tuhon Jack with Tor who has checked in and given his greetings, as well as we have, of course, none other than Brother Earl and Brother Kyle, two of your Pride and Joy students, and one of our students and one of our sisters, Rachel, as well as I think Brother Adam.
Guru Adam
from Florida. So good evening and greetings to all. And
right.
So
we want to share some stuff, because where you left off in Njoli, right before you segue into PTK, we, like 10 years, I don't know how long ago it was, I was out in Los Angeles training capoeira for the first time, with a sister rising power by the name of Yanana. I hadn't even met AK yet. I had just started literally capoeira Angola. I was a young Ras Angola Tafari. Yeah, and she had this guest senior instructor come and teach the class one time, and boom, it was Brother Njoli. And I knew nothing about capoeira at the time, and Njoli was a senior at that time. He was good, he was tricky, he was crafty. I moved back to New York, moved to Philadelphia, get involved. By then I had met AK, started Kali, but then moved to Philadelphia. I'm going somewhere, folks, bear with me. Got deep into capoeira. Met Jenna, we are on this capoeira journey, and boom, along the way, I crossed paths with Njoli again. It's a beautiful experience. And at this time, folks, he's a high-ranking instructor in the capoeira community, running a group, and he's just a great player. I can't say enough. If you haven't heard Njoli sing any capoeira songs, if you haven't heard him speak Portuguese or his grasp of the language, so this is who this guy was. Okay, Then I leave, I take a break from the capoeira community for a lot of reasons because of what was going on in Philadelphia. I call AK, getting back involved in the Kali. 2012, met Francis Estrada. He invites me to a seminar where Tuhon Ramel is in 2013. Had to take this whole long point to the story. I met a Tuhon Ramel seminar in 2013, and in walks brother Njoli. You know, and it was just so great to see him again after all these years in another martial art. And he was very formidable. He was already strong, and he was already united with the elite. And so when I hear your story of prior to meeting then Mandala Kid, you're traveling to the Philippines, you know, and spending time with the masters. I had already known of your grasp of the Portuguese language through capoeira. You're somebody who's very much involved and immerses himself in the culture of the art that he's studying. And that's something that is unique, profound, and interesting. And I'm wondering if you could kind of expound on that and talk a little bit about how your journey in Pakiti then led to MSMB. Does that make sense? Yeah, oh, now they want to hear some singing. Yeah. At the end, we're going to get the bitter mouth, brother. Okay? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, I mean, we talked a little bit about this the other day in that, remember we were talking about, for me, discerning a little bit the difference between what I consider our focal point or our avenue or our focus as being comprehensive martial arts as opposed to like mixed martial arts. And maybe this kind of speaks to that a little bit, because really for me, yes, it is completely viable in some formats to be like, I learned this one punch from this martial art, and then I learned this one strike from this martial art, and I kind of half learned this one from this other one, and then I put those together and create something anew. But I think that sometimes something really valuable is missed when we don't spend the time to kind of really immerse and delve deep. And so whether that be capoeira or that be Kali or Silat or like some other kind of martial art, you know, that spending the time and the effort to really like deeply study something, to evaluate something, try to understand something, and then use the discerning mind and be like, oh, that's not relevant for me. That's not worthwhile for me. Of course, that's important as well, you know. I think that there's also something to do with the idea, and Matas Guru Francis can definitely tell you that I talked to him a lot about this, and Tuhon Kit as well, that all the things like culture and language, I look at martial arts definitely in its pragmatic sense, where it's about, yes, I want to learn to defend myself, defend my family, defend my community, and be able to like empower other people to be able to do that same thing, right? To determine in advance what is so valuable to them that they are willing to put themselves in harm's way, and then have the tools in which to be able to like navigate those kind of scenarios. But the other thing is that martial arts serve as a tool to get us involved in a culture in which we can explore perhaps some devices that they have that aren't martial. So I look to capoeira and I look to Kali as a way for me to find out, oh, how did communities also resolve problems, conflicts, oftentimes, which were potentially really horrible, in nonviolent ways? Perhaps there's some technique or some way or some system they had in the Philippines in some Ilonggo communities that we never heard of, that was not martial, that was a way that they resolved problems before it got to this phase, and then this phase was the other. You know, same thing with capoeira, like what were our ways of communicating in ways that felt that they were comprehensive and enveloping and involved the entirety of us, whether it be like emotional, psychological, spiritual, and physical, that were all the precursors to when we got involved in a kind of physical confrontation, and it became something that was more aggressive, more violent, more martial in a lot of regards. So I look a lot of times to martial arts as like, oh, they're supposed to remind me that this community had a whole bunch of things to offer, of which this is one, and I'm missing out if I don't spend the time to evaluate what else they have to give me, you know?
Yeah.
So,
see, we're on the same page there, at least Jenna and I, in terms of immersing yourself in the culture of the system that you study, you know, and then, you know, but you find, of course, folks out there who just want to extract elements of the system, perhaps not in a harmful way, but because listen, I just want to get the nice stuff. I just want to. Yeah. So how do we balance that? Or do we balance that? Or do we make it mandatory? What do you think about that, brother?
I mean, I think the challenging thing is that, one, it has to be dependent on the teacher, and it also has to be dependent on a certain level of clarity between teacher and their community and their students to say, if you're involved with my group, that's part and parcel of what I do. You know, for, like you said, Kyle and Earl are on here. They are also involved with me in Capoeira and Kali and Silat, and they know that part of the requirement for that is for them to be actively interested in language, be actively interested in what is the plight of women in the Philippines in politics, what is the relationship between men and women in African cultures throughout the diaspora. Like, that has to be part of it. And that's just me also relegating myself into the position of saying, I may sometimes have less students. So, you know, it's a different situation, obviously, because I have to be okay with the idea that sometimes maybe we won't have as many students, but the students we do have will be really empowered. They will be able to go into any forum and speak intelligently about the work that they're doing and why it is that they do it. And you know, that's an important thing as important a thing to pass on as physical ability. And some people may totally be fine with just the physical ability, and that's, you know, that's its own thing. That's just a choice that I'm making for myself, that my community is trying to do something that's uplifting across the board. You know?
Right.
So.
Yeah, and you know, we're definitely on the same page, because, like you're saying, there's an importance in the culture, because there are certain things that we can gather. There are certain lessons that we can gather, because, you know, when we train martial science, we think, okay, we obviously are learning to protect ourselves and our families, but there's the big if necessary. You know, any responsible instructor would say, defend yourself if necessary. Of course, try to avoid the situation, but defend yourself if necessary. And so, because, you know, you're training lifelong, or you're training for a significant amount of time, you know, in between all of that, other than just practicing drills all day, what else are you doing to become connected to what you're doing? And then also, you know, when people become skilled and then they move towards leadership positions, how do you establish that system of checks and balances where someone is able to develop the character skills needed to become a great leader as well as an instructor, something we talked about in a previous episode. And I'm 100% on board of having culture teach us those lessons as well. You know, ironically today, my daughter and I, we were watching the Apache Women's Rites of Passage video. And we were, you know, learning how they teach their daughters to transition to womanhood. And the cultural element, there was cultural elements and there were physical elements that came with it, but they were so much one and the same. And so I believe that, you know, learning cultural elements, it doesn't have to always be an exact tradition or an exact ritual, but having that sense of culture emerge with learning something physical is almost essential to, you know, being able to to move in that, uniform way, so that you're like a true flower, you're not like a half flower,
Develop a whole
Yeah.
human being.
Right.
So, so I'm definitely for
I mean,
that.
that's exactly the point, right?
Yeah, definitely.
If you're just tuning in,
Exactly the
folks,
point.
Brother Demela we got some more folks jumping in. Brother Demela is jumping in. Good to see you, sir, and some more folks. We're talking about the value of culture while training a combat system like Pakiti or any other system. And one of the things that we've experienced together and others is, at the very least, if you're listening to the show and you're an instructor and you don't find it relevant to teach the culture while you're teaching the Pakiti, at least have your students respect the culture. Because when we travel to the Philippines or you've traveled to Brazil, you see a disrespect of the culture on a massive scale, independent of you. I'm not saying that you, but that's already taking place. And the last thing you want is your students to participate in something like that. So at the very least, there should be some kind of respect for the culture. From our perspective, that's taught, and I can't see anybody disagreeing with that. Do you require your students to learn the language? Okay, talk to me about that.
I mean, well, so, there's a couple of levels. One is that step back into what Jenna was saying, which was definitely this element of how much stuff there is of value in there, and that, like you were saying, Ross, that we're not two-dimensional beings. And if the time you spend with me, I imagine that my students have 1,000 other things they could be doing. And so I want that the couple of hours that they spend with me each day is of value to them in a wide array of different means. Meaning that, like, what I'm teaching them is not only of value in that 0.01% of times when they're in physical conflict, but it's of value to them when they're at work, or when they're in their romantic relationship, or when they're in their friendship relationships. Like, it needs to, hopefully, what I'm doing is emoting something or conveying something that's of value to them in the larger percentage of their life that they actually live, and is also completely practical and useful in those like 0.01% of times when they're in physical conflict. So, not to ever diminish the importance of that, but just to say it's important in that other way. But then in this thing of like learning language, learning culture, in an expansive way, what I do is this. I say that I try to model that is an important thing to me. And anyone here, both in my group here or amongst my teachers, can tell you that I'm super invested in like the learning of culture and language. That if I throw an event, I will always apportion periods of time in that event that are specifically just dedicated towards learning elements of history and culture. Because that is the least we can do, is like give some honor to the people who had to fight through stuff and die through stuff so that I got to kick it on Saturday and do it like after I have brunch.
Absolutely.
Like the least I can do is learn your history and, give some value to that. As far as language, I feel like, one, there are secrets that are hidden in language, and I think that there's something really beautiful about that. I also think that when we encounter teachers who are really of value, being able to speak the language is our way of expressing to them like a certain level of honor and a certain level of valuation. So, obviously in Portuguese, with capoeira, a lot of teachers in Brazil, they don't speak English. If you want to learn capoeira, like real, authentic, old capoeira, you got to find the oldest dude you can possibly find and be able to speak Portuguese. That's pretty much, you have to find that guy, go to where he is, speak in Portuguese, and hope that he decides to bless you with some information. And although in Kali and Eskrima and Anis, you know, Spanish, English, all of these kind of colonial languages have made their way into the culture. I would say that my experience of Tuhon Jared, who is not Filipino, and his relationship to Filipino teachers and people in that culture is really differentiated by the fact that he speaks the language. That people are like, oh, I feel like you put so much effort into learning something from us that I'm willing to give something to you. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to be said for that, like the reciprocal nature of all relationships, you know?
Yeah, Tuhon Jared might be one of the best examples here because he's someone who speaks the language fluently, has immersed himself in the culture, and has also been able to do where he's extracted elements of PTK for particular law enforcement programs. And he's done so. He's kind of a good representative of that balance, in our opinion, because he's able to kind of manage both worlds, where he's saying, listen, this is what the law enforcement programs need. This is what I'm going to do with TRICOM. At the same time, I'm making sure I'm modeling and I'm not speaking for Tuhon, by the way. This is just what I'm gathering from how he's representing himself. I'm going to be able to model, you know, a level that my skill set is attached to this cultural immersion. That's how I see it. And my ability to even extract components of the complete system is coming from the fact that I've made sure to do my homework and go deep in. I'm not just already kind of learning things on the surface and then taking elements. And so he, I think, would be a great example for that kind of balance.
And that he makes the ready admission as well that he still has things to learn. So this is a thing that I think is huge with like teachers who are masters, to be like, even when you have mastered an art, you are still in a process of studentship. You are still in a process of learning. And that when I've come to Tuhon Jared and asked him about very particular things that, you know, I want to work on from Tuhon Phil or from Tuhon Kit, he'll be like, oh, you need to ask that guy. You know, he will refer me over to another person and be like, oh, you know what, that's something that I'm working on, or that might not be in my wheelhouse, and I'm willing to refer that on to someone else. And so that's a big thing, to be able to both own the title of Tuhon, or own the title of mastery, and also say that mastery doesn't necessarily mean complete. It doesn't mean that like I have completed my quest or my journey to like have a level of understanding, but it just means that like I have a complete understanding of what I have an understanding of. You know, like I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. And I'm willing to say that, you know, really outright and really clearly.
Right.
Do you know your own bubble, as I like to say?
Yeah,
you know? And you know, and we're fortunate to have, you know, again, we have a vast array of Tuhons. So just Tuhon Ilongo, Tuhon Bolden Garucho Nanoy, Tuhon Nanoy, Tuhon Ramel, who are also, you know, then you have your Tuhon Jarrett's, Tuhon Leslie's, they immerse them. Tuhon Leslie Buck is another one who immerses himself in the culture. And then we actually have the culture, you know, and so we're really fortunate in the PTK community to have a lot of resources and references.
Right. And so if you're just tuning in, we are blessed to have our brother, a great friend, MNG and Njoli Brown, joining us. Again, he has a vast story in how he got into PTK. However, right now he is an instructor with the elite groups in the elite group in New York. We have a couple of questions on the floor. We're going to start with one. It's from Brother Ali Johnson. He says, I am really impressed with your empty hand work concerning Kali. How did you develop yourself in that area? Any tips?
That was the real question, actually.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I mean, so I will talk about empty hands as an entirety thing, and then Pangamut as its own like specific thing. So as an empty hands practitioner or someone who puts a lot of emphasis on that overall, you know, I spend a lot of time boxing. Like I definitely like train boxing. I go to a boxing gym. I go and do like some smokers. So I do, you know, actual like compete in boxing and go and do some of that stuff as my practice. I wrestled all growing up and throughout. And so that's always been a thing that was interesting to me and part of my own practice. And also, I'm from New York and New Jersey, and so empty hands is just part of our like livelihood. Yeah, and like, you know, throwing hands is like something you develop a proficiency of, or at least that you place value in. You know, that you're like, oh, it is valuable for me to learn how to do this. So that's definitely a thing that is part of my practice. And maybe later on we'll talk about this thing, black box, that I do.
We are going to.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But as far as Pangamut and in Kali, I've found in my experience or my exposure that a lot of people outside of Kali or in other forms of Kali or whatever are very dubious. You know, they're very doubtful about like the effectiveness of Kali because a lot of times the way it's practiced is off like a single direct feed. Like you throw a jab cross that I have already preemptively determined, and now I've developed some responses in relation to that thing. Or you just throw a jab and I do like a whole bunch of different movements with you just holding that jab out there. So for me, maybe because of some of my other references, yes, I kind of scaffold the practice where I start maybe from something like that. And then my next thing is like, okay, now I need you to be throwing jabs and retract, jab crosses and retract, and like go into your guard. And then like looking at the viability of bisects when someone actually knows how to retract their strikes and throw multiple strikes in an unanticipated sequence. I think that there are a whole bunch of things that are super viable and really worthwhile in PTK Pangamut, and it is completely dependent, maybe unfortunately, but completely dependent on the teacher and their style of teaching. Mm-hmm. And if they're teaching it in a way that feels both practical and relates to the way real fighters in the world fight. Not meaning like suckers. I mean like fighters who know how to fight. Like fighters who like pull a jab quick and throw like a double jab and then throw that cross and then move to somewhere. So you can scaffold your practice off like a predetermined feed, but something about that thing then has to elevate through the rungs of the ladder until a point where you're like, okay, develop your responses to the jab. And if you're looking for the cross, you need to develop jab responses and then move to an angle that is relative to when the jab comes out. And you have to be able to see what the body mechanics are that are associated with that. And maybe that also depends on, do I have a group of students who actually know how to throw strikes?
Right.
Because they need to throw strikes that are effective for me to even have something to practice in relation to. So there's that part of it too. So, you know, a lot of my practice with Kali and with PTK and its Pangamut is really first about teaching my students to throw really effective strikes with a lot of energy, a lot of power, a lot of maneuverability and mobility, a lot of torque, and a lot of footwork associated with it. And then teaching all of our PTK responses in relation to someone who's an effective striker.
Yes.
Yeah.
I really resonate a lot with what you're saying, good brother. Because, you know, growing up, I just saw guys with good hands beat the shit out of every martial art. Seriously, guys with, oh, he's training this. And at least where I grew up in the Bronx, none of that mattered. You know, like what you were training and you got guys, like they said, who could just slang them. And so learning how boxing for me is something I personally take time to invest in training because of, like you said, knowing how quick and effective that system can really be against guys who aren't training against a punch. And then, like you said, if you don't even know how to throw a punch, you're doing a disservice to your partner because they're thinking that that's going to be the feed. And then you or you master that one drill and you don't escalate or add intensity to begin to get closer to what the fight is going to look like. So I respect that that you do that, brother, especially that you said you still compete, right? When was the last time anybody here took a punch in the mouth? I respect that. You know?
I mean, last summer I was spending time going to like a couple of different smokers, like out in the Northwest and out on the West Coast and stuff. So I still go to boxing events and I'll go and compete and I'll go and like
keeps you humble
and like blah, blah, blah. But, you know, like also the important part of that is that because of that, I do completely think that PTK Pongramut stuff is relevant. It just depends on how you train it. And also that I have enough friends who are boxers that know me from that community that I'm like, if I call them up on an off day and I'm like, yo, I just need you to throw some punches and let me see if this bisect works. Or let me see if I can catch your hand on this like Sagong Labo. Like they're willing to give me a little space to work on some of the stuff that I'm working on.
We really find the value of disrupting the senses in those moments. So, you know, when we were talking initially, we were identifying you as a co-instructor of the elite. But in actuality, you also very much have an independent program that you spearhead, that you run, that kind of encapsulates this vision of what you're talking about with a comprehensive study of martial systems. And that we know as this MSMB. Take for a minute, good brother. Tell us a little bit about what MSMB represents to you. How is it different than any other mixed martial art program, et cetera, et cetera? I know, but I want the people to hear.
No, definitely. I mean, part of it has to do with, and I will talk about like the elite family or the PTK elite thing, is that it is so challenging, I think, for sometimes for people to grasp and understand because a lot of people don't have experience in what it really looks like to collaborate with other people. And that's so foreign to them that they're like, I don't understand how you guys can be collaborating, but not be the same, but be together, but also be, and that is, I think, what that thing is trying to model, you know, that there's originally that PTK elite group was out in New York. It was kind of started up with Matasna Guru Francis and Matasna Guru Nate and Kuya Bobby. And I think Guru Mike was part of that original group. And they were all students of Tuhon Ramel. You know, that was their like center point. And then soon after there, I think Mandala RV moved out to New York and he was coming from Texas and his primary, you know, center point was Tuhon Irwin and Tuhon Leslie. So those were his references. And then I moved back soon after from living in the Philippines and my reference was Tuhon Kit, you know, like that was my reference. That's what I knew of PTK. But we all determined that we still wanted to teach and work together. And we also wanted to model to all of our students that it's really important to value what all of these different Tuhons have to bring to the table and to also demonstrate that teachers can work together and find all the like overlapping intersectionality of the art itself, even when they come from different reference points. And so, you know, and also to make sure that we could like work independently, you know, like RV, if anybody from Queens comes, we're like, go to RV because he lives in Queens. If anyone from the Bronx or Manhattan comes, they're like, go to Njoli because that's where he is. If anyone from Brooklyn comes, we're like, go to go to, you know, Francis, and then every Sunday we'll like bring everyone together to remind them that we are still all part of one community. We're still all of our teachers respect each other. We all learn from each other. You know, when I teach, I see Francis and Arvi taking class. And Arvi's a mandala, like he's probably one of the most senior students here in the country.
Right.
And I'm teaching class and Arvi will take class. And I always respect that, and that Francis takes class and vice versa. So there's that element of it, but also that we can all have independent visions. So, you know, RV has a way that he likes to teach. And then for me with MSMB, I have things that are really important to me, not only with PTK, but also with Capoeira, but also with Silat, but also with this black box program that I do, where I'm very interested in people doing a deep dive into cultural investment. I'm into very slow process of ranking. So I'm into, you know, any of them can say like, I would rather have my like Yakan 3 have as much skill as your Lakanguro. You know, I would like to like have a very slow process of ranking, but where like every one of them feels and knows that I'm personally invested in them on a very like familial level. Like I'm invested in them and they're learning not just as a martial artist, but as a person in their personal development. I want them to come out of their experience, like learning a new language, learning about teaching not just in martial arts, but learning about teaching as an art form that's completely translatable to the rest of their life. You know, that's a large part of what's really a focal point for me, and that I try and bring to the table, whether it's in the elite format with PTK, whether it's in Capoeira, it's in Silat, it's in Black Box, or whatever, and cultural identity, you know? So when you see our logo, there's, we spent a lot of time developing this logo where it's a rooster and a snake because we focused on visual icons that had equal amount of like emotional, spiritual, and intellectual relevance, both in Asia, Southeast Asia, and throughout Africa. And we were like, we're gonna put all of those things and make sure that they're all integrated. And then all of the Adinkra symbols that are in there are each indicating different values. Some of them are about, you know, straight warrior values, which are courage and honor, but some of them are around the ability to deal with loss, or some of them are around the ability to learn from things that seem abstract, or, you know, there are a variety of things that are like within that symbol that are supposed to talk about comprehensive development, not just martial development. So yeah.
And Njoli's is deep, 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 and I like your use of the term comprehensive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I appreciate you taking the time to kind of unpackage a little bit what you said first about the relationship that you have with the elites. Having been up there and seeing it for ourselves, that is a perfect, you guys represent that beautifully as a unified body of leadership. You know, you guys do that great, and I think that's a great benefit to the practitioners. Yes, my love.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that so many people so many leaders in the PTK world could really learn from the elites, and that they all have, you know, very humble and very supportive instructors. Right. And we've experienced that with each individual instructor and the entire group, yes. You know, and so we definitely appreciate being able to look to that example, and we encourage other people as well.
And how you are also pushing the MSMB.
Right.
And that, you know, pretty much like Njoli said, those events are very different than your regular PTK seminars. He's embodying culture, he's having discussions, you know, the elite family is participating. He's in, you know, and you really, I see you also trying to move the direction not, you know, so you got the traditional way that we're all doing with the PTK, but then this MSMB seems like you're able to kind of, you know, you're not just taking the surface of things, you're making sure everyone has a comprehensive understanding of the various arts that you're studying, but you're able to move a little more freely with how your interpretation and expression of it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what does MSMB stand for?
So MSMB stands for Martial Science Mactubicalis. So Mactubicalis is Latin for the path of honor. And yeah, like I was saying with, you know, being in the elites, like it is a thing where we collectively work, but it doesn't have to take away from the fact that I'm an individual person with my own individual ideas and like perspective and goals and aspirations, and that's important too. And yeah, like you were saying, when I have an MSMB event, you will see I don't necessarily just invite PTK people, because I want to also honor the work that people are doing outside of that. So, you know, 2 years ago, I feel like we brought Angel up here who does like FCS, and that was when I had, you know, Guru Ras up here and doing some work. And then last year I had Mandala Jason, but I also had, you know, Senshi Wilton, who is doing Kunta Kala Cruzada and doing Lightning Scientific, and to say, I completely value the work you're doing. And I feel like the more exposure we get, the better. The more we learn to appreciate other people, the better. And so I have him there. I also usually, when I have events, I don't, you know, we as a mass group can invite Tuhons, but I don't generally, for my events, bring Tuhons, because I'm trying to highlight laterally. You know, I'm trying to highlight like the lateral structure. We were talking about this the other day, where there was this capoeira instructor who, you know, I wasn't his biggest fan or whatever else, but I remember him saying a thing at a time where he was like, oh, you know, this master, he already has his fan base. He already has people from his peer group who know him doing the work, blah, 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 who see him and know who he is. And he was like, you know, you need to take this time. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, you need to take the time to look to your left and right and highlight the guys who are right beside you, who are doing some of the hard work and really doing beautiful things, trying to like uplift the culture, uplift their community, and build and grow whatever the art is, and highlight them. So I really try and use the MSMB events to highlight folks who I just know from the community, who I'm like, oh, I just want you to know that I respect you. I want you to know that I value how challenging it is for you to show up every day and pay sometimes to teach. You know, like how often, Roz, Jenna, you guys know, sometimes you are paying to teach. You are paying to use this space to have maybe one person show up and take class. And for me, I want to really, because I have that experience myself, I want to show that I value that thing in all people, that like, you love this thing so much that you show up day to day on your home time, you practice, and on a lateral basis, I respect you and I love you, you know, for doing that thing and maintaining this art, you know.
You know, I personally want to just attest to that, brother. You are constantly promoting other instructors as the years go on multiple platforms, which has in turn inspired us. And every summer, we've made it a habit to not only bring Tuhon out here, but try to honor other local instructors in the Northeast whom we can bring out. And, you know, we've been blessed to have you come out here to Philadelphia, Mandala RV, of course, a lot of the names that you've mentioned. And I think that's something that we should model more often, is not only the masters, but also we have a lot of top level senior instructors here, which is kind of what we're trying to do with this show, is trying to just broaden the landscape and understanding, and to use a term that you've been using, have a more comprehensive understanding of PTK.
Right.
There's some questions we've been neglecting.
Yeah, and when we did have the honor of hosting you, and when we kind of got to experience your teaching style, I noticed that you often, give an expansive approach to something that we might have thought was something that we do to just not thinking and repetitiously just kind of doing it over and over again. You bring fine details to those things and try to find other ways to manifest it, which opens our horizon. I think it's a beautiful thing to do, to always open your horizons of the foundation. And so with that, Brother Marcilio, another one of our good friends from Brazil, has said, hello, Brother Njoli, how do you reconcile the technical knowledge of various martial arts and their similarities in some techniques?
Cool. Well, first of all, bom dia, Marcílio, como tá? Bom te ver. Tanto tempo, eu acho que sim. But yeah, definitely, I definitely think about the fact that bodies are bodies, and that everyone's bodies are going to be different. There's an old mestre from capoeira, Angola, mestre Pastinha, who used to say, cada é cada like each one is each one. The way that you express a thing is going to be so independent and individual to you, and the way that I express it and understand it is going to be individual to me. And so what I'm trying to learn through like really deep involvement in martial arts is not necessarily techniques, but I'm trying to develop my body's capacity to, one, be adaptable, and to be able to understand, to be able to look at things and understand what's happening in someone else's body, and understanding what needs to be happening in my own body in order to reconcile with that. And so, when in conflict, sometimes somebody inspiring might be like, oh, I saw you doing a thing, it looked like capoeira. It's not necessarily about like, oh, I'm doing a thing from capoeira. It's just that my body is determining that in this moment, this relationship requires that from me. This relationship requires me to be more loose and more flexible. And in this other moment, the relationship requires me to be more hard and more firm. Just like in conversation, right? Like capoeira, we talk about body conversation, right? This moment requires me to be very clear about my beliefs and my values and my statement. And this other moment requires me to be more flexible and to like move back and forth and be more pliable. And so I think about that with martial arts, that like there's a relationship happening between you and the other person. And the more and more I train, the more I practice, the more viable it is for me and my body and my intellect to adapt and change depending on what's required of that situation. I don't talk to my girlfriend the same as I talk to my boss. I don't talk to my boss the same as I talk to my mother. I relate to each of those moments differently and allow myself to like move fluidly through each one. So
beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, PTK. Let's talk PTK for a second. What is the some of the concepts and techniques that you feel you're personally working on right now, and why?
What am I working on right now? I feel like I spend a lot of time in all kind of like double weapons practices. But the other thing is that I try to, in parallel work, do Tri-V practice with Dos Métodos practice. And so I really like thoroughly invest in both of those practices in alignment with each other. Partly because it expands my vocabulary, and I feel like I'm a better teacher and a better learner when I'm able to have more tools in my basket for this student who needs this one thing versus this other student who needs something explained in a completely different thing. The other thing is that I try and spend time training with people who are better than me. So I talk a lot about, like, whenever I have like these live streams that I do or whatever, I say there's like 3 objectives that I have. One is I'm trying to give you the skills to explore the art. Like, I want you to, like Tuhon Kit says with his Kalimundo, he says, explore the art. Like, I want you to be creative and understand it in a way where you can really explore and love what you're doing. I want you to have practical skills that you can use when you're fighting or when you're sparring. And my third thing is I want you to be able to train with somebody better than me. I want you to have, like, you need to know how to do reverse triangles so you can go and show up and learn all the cool stuff that Tuhon Phil has to teach, or the cool, beautiful technical stuff that Tuhon Leslie can teach, or Tuhon Kit teaches. So that being said, when I do Dos Métodos, I want to be able to learn the language because I feel like it's shorthand for a really expansive dictionary of knowledge. And so that when someone says, oh, okay, we're going to start from second set of seguidas number 3, that I already have that in my mind, so we can jump past all the intermediary stuff that gets us to there, and now we can start the work. When someone says, like, oh, we're going to go from, Contradas series number 6, then I can be like, okay, cool. Like, I already know what number 6 is. So I have like a starting point, and now we can move forward. It's kind of like in the old days when people would learn shorthand, and they would be like, okay, cool. Like, we know how to do this part. Now we can learn on a deeper level and gain some knowledge from there. So yeah, I try and learn those things in a parallel way. I remember Tuhon Ramel talking a little bit one time of saying, like, how it almost flip-flopped at a point, that before it was like you learn Dos Métodos kind of as your first and primary thing, and then you move towards like more application of things, and then it moved towards, let's go directly to the application, like our Try-V. And now let's look at the Dos Métodos as building your vocabulary out, both as a student and as a teacher. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been spending a lot of my time, is thoroughly investigating that and exploring it.
Beautiful. Yeah, those forms in Dos Métodos, forms and movements and motions, I say, with quotation, especially now when you're by yourself, really good to know. Really good to know. And, a lot of our training is so much dependent on the timing and feedback of a partner, So I'm just curious to just ask all instructors, okay, so now what's your solo thing that you're working on, and how are you developing that? And so, that's a good point. And, not all of us are blessed to have that ability to know Dulce versus Try-V. Some of us are just locked into one or the other, and so
go and hang out with Tuhon Kit. Tuhon Kit is like the hidden treasure of PTK, because this dude learns so fast. He learns at this like accelerated level and is able to like process information and knowledge and like hold knowledge in a way that is profound to me. Is really profound to me. We were talking before, like the other day when we were talking about these different groups like PTKWF and PTTA and Kalimundo, and I was saying how, it's challenging sometimes for people to understand that we're in all of it, like we value all of that stuff and we are deep invested in all of it. Tuhon Ramel for me is quintessentially my center point for understanding how expansive PTK is, and that when people don't want to spend the time to learn a thing, they assume that PTK doesn't have it existing. But in truth, you know, when I spend time with 200 mil, I'm like, oh, this stuff is there. I just never even had exposure to it yet. And it's all like super deep in there and really involved and enveloped in that thing. Tuhon Jared is the person who reminds me that old things are relevant in contemporary worlds, you know? And so in the same way with capoeira, you know, and maybe we'll talk about this at another time, but, you know, things that are old and antiquated and come from like ancestral knowledge still have relevance in a contemporary world when applied in a way that has a mindset for applying it.
Mm-hmm.
But then Tuhon Kit, who was my, you know, my first teacher in PTK and who still is like the center point for my reference, he was the person who reminded me like, it's still okay for you to exist in this world of PTK. You don't have to dissolve yourself in order for PTK to exist, but instead like infuse your own personality, infuse your own creativity, your own understanding of the world, try and reinterpret these things and like make it manifest in a way that's relevant for you. And Tuhon Kit was the person who, for me, reminded me again that like, you are of value in a thing that is ancient. You as a contemporary being in new society, in the new world, are equally relevant in a thing that has been here since time immemorial, you know, and that's an important thing for new students to remember, because I will see a new student do a thing and I'll be like, I never thought of that.
Mhm.
You know, I never even saw that before.
Mhm.
And also to remember it and honor kind of a long lineage of things and be like, oh, like this created a platform for me to realize my creativity. So Tuhon Kit really exemplifies that for me in a lot of ways, you know.
I'm so glad, brother, that we got here in this part of the conversation because, again, the way you as the elites model coexisting as instructors, what you just spoke about right now is very important. Being able to honor the Tuhons that you know and love without any backlash, because what's happening, what we have observed is that with the politics and the division and the factionalism, there are some people, students, practitioners who are now hesitant to connect or communicate with certain Tuhons or certain camps. And instead it's become this, and I think, you know, we need these models about what you just said, like, no, this is what I love about this Tuhon, and this is how this Tuhon enriches me, and this is how this one enriches me. And I don't want to necessarily be limited, one, in my relationships with these individuals, but two, in my capacity to learn and grow this system that everybody has their own understanding of. You know, to tell your students, yeah, I want you to go with somebody better than me. That's leadership right there. Because essentially you're saying, I don't want to be the sole source of your understanding of this system. I'm removing and sometimes as instructors, we get locked into that and we get all. So you saying that with just those three, you know, there's so many beautiful and great Tuhons out there. I'm hoping we can kind of move more in that direction, good brother. I love how you express that.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more about what you just said about those three right there. Yeah, appreciate that, good brother. And there's more we want to unpackage. You're very, your analysis, brother, I really truly appreciate it. Because your students and those that know you, they're gonna get a full plate. You're not just gonna get some the veggies on the side, or just you're making sure to feed your students. Sorry.
I remember having this conversation with Mestre Cobrinha, Mestre Cobra Mansa, Capoeira Angola. And, I remember us talking a lot about the idea that like, I'm going to have a lot of students over the course of time, some who continue to train, some who don't do capoeira, some who blah, blah, blah. But that the time that they spend with us will inform their lives. And that he was like, oh, you know, I have some guy who did capoeira for like 3 years or something like that, but then later on was like a Supreme Court judge in Brazil, and his experience in capoeira informed the way that he visualized people in impoverished communities in Brazil.
Mhm.
I think the same thing in Kali, like, and perhaps maybe that's why I'm so invested in this kind of like cultural aspect and this kind of social aspect, that some of these people will leave Kali, they won't do PTK after a year or 2 years or whatever else. But my hope is that the time that they spend with us informs their relationship to international relationships, relationships with Asian and indigenous cultures, relationships with cultures that are just other than their own. You know, so maybe what they take away from here, they only learned how to do a 1 and 2 strike and nothing, and not even well.
Mhm.
But what they also learned from there was, oh, there was a whole bunch more to that culture than I ever realized, and there's something of value there. Maybe martial arts wasn't the thing for me, but maybe music was the thing for me. Or maybe learning about art and history from, you know, MNG Francis was the thing for me. Or learning about food from Earl was the thing for me. Like, that they will use this as an entryway into a broader mindset around their relationships in the overall, you know, kind of in a more universal sense. So
Yes.
Brother, listen, we could talk for hours, man. I'm that guy. I like
Right.
this type of conversation. And you know, I'm hoping the listeners and the viewers are taking what you're saying to heart, because this is incredibly important for us, at least for the future of PTK, is this kind of sensitivity to the information. You know, just some final thoughts, good brother, before we wrap this up. Any particular advice or thoughts on the future that you could provide instructors or students?
I mean,
That you've
there was
taken away
maybe,
on your journey. I know, yeah, I know. You know, it's just the beginning of you're gonna be on again, my brother. We're gonna be here, you know.
yeah,
So.
it's whatever. No, the things are really like the things that we've already talked about, though. It would be like, go and train as an instructor, as a teacher. Like, you know, MNG Francis will tell you, like, I show up in his beginner class and I'm like taking class. You know, I'm there, one, to be a participant in the class, and also to let other students know that I'm not beyond doing 1s and 2s for like a half hour. You know, I'm not beyond that. Like, that is part of my practice. The other thing is to invite your community, you know, so I know that there's obviously, you know, financial restrictions around some of that stuff, but just a reminder to show appreciation and gratitude for the folks who maintain groups in the day to day. One day to the next, they're doing that thing. They're renting spaces. They're holding space for groups to be able to exist, and to invite those instructors and have them come out and share what it is that they know. Um, to not devalue the learning or the experience of other people. That's one thing I see a lot online, and I feel like is really destructive, you know, whether it be from one martial art to another. I'm of the opinion that all things have value. Even if I don't understand the value of that thing, things have value. And like, maybe it's just my limited ability to investigate sometimes, but that things have value, and that like maybe I need to ask better questions. And so to not be afraid of asking questions and really putting the words out there to ask teachers or instructors or students, and kind of do some critical discernment around your experience of other people's practices, other people's way of teaching, other people's way of learning, to invest a little bit in that, because martial arts aside, like I will get old, my joints will get bad, my joints are already probably shaky, like a whole bunch of stuff will go awry. So the best that I can be searching for is like being a better human. Like, am I actively working towards being a better human? And what does that look like? What am I going to get from this experience in order to support that? So, yeah, that would be my advice. That would be what I put out there.
I love it, brother, and appreciate it.
We truly appreciate you, and we're so glad that you were able to join us and have such an important conversation. And give people just a little more insight into who you are, because we're honored to know you, but I'm happy other people can see as well. I want to close out with a quick story. I wanted to share that one of my favorite seminars, we were working together. It was a joint seminar with Tuhon Leslie and Tuhon Ramel, and we were working together, and it was like, sometimes seminars go down rabbit holes where you're like, you get kind of like a brain freeze, and it'll be intense, or you'll just be trying to figure out what the move is. After a certain point, it's hard to process. Everyone knows in PTK it's like calculus class, and I remember you just being very helpful, and but always just kind of making it light. You made every time I was able to work with you just kind of a light experience, and not like so much pressure on trying to get the movements, and then trying to as a young instructor trying to be an example as well. You were able to, make the moves light. And then I was able to like get it at like the right moment. I was able to get a movement at the right moment, and I was so excited, but, you also were able to, help me get, feel accomplished. So, it's nothing like having a good partner when you're training. And I always remember that. So just want to say thank you for that. And thank you so much for being on our show. We have our normal goodies that we like to give out, our training blades.
We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah, we'll definitely
I just want to say my memory of Njoli is being heavy-handed in those first years with them hacks and those elbows. I was like, all right, my man, okay.
Yeah, I got a heavy-handed. Yeah, I will
smooth that out a little bit. I'm glad, my brother. I'm glad. No, I'm just kidding. We appreciate you taking this time, family. And as you see the chats, a lot of love is pouring in. Brother Doug, good to see you. You made the show. The Elite family is sending their love. The Nomads send their love. My students, Rachel and Kelly, logged in and showed their love. Byron Wilson is just tagging in. So, we appreciate everybody showing their support. And Brother Njoli, we need to support what you're talking about, and hopefully the folks listening here will tap in and make some new friends and have this conversation continue. Okay, one last thing. Brother Morgan, what's in your pockets right now? What's your EDC? Gear dump. I gotta do this for every guest now, real quick. What are you carrying? Who wants to push the gear dump challenge?
The only thing I'm carrying right now is actually this Sarah Kitty.
Damn.
Oh, just
people are like, oh, you thought you were gonna catch me slipping. You thought you were gonna catch me slipping. This is kind of a funny one, because actually it's interesting because it doesn't have the longest blade, but it's short, but it's wide front to back, and it has a lot of heft, and it has a really wide carry here, and it has that forward choil up here. It has a wide front to back on the spine, which is nice. So I like this one because I feel like for just regular day-to-day, cutting boxes, cutting rope, cutting all those kind of things, like it feels substantial in your hand. And so this is like my regular all the time, either this one or the Emerson Kershaw, because it has that, like, it has the Emerson wave on it. And that one I really picked up from Mandala Jason. But this is kind of my regular go-to across the board. It's not the longest blade, so it still meets a lot of the standards for carrying in most urban scenarios, because it's only like 3 to 3.5 inches, but the handle of it is substantial, and the front to back is substantial, it has what's similar to, or kind of a rip-off of the spider hole from Spider Code. So you're able to open it really easy with the one finger. So yeah, that's my go-to. I also want to highlight, obviously, I saw that my man was behind this wing from our good friend Ray Smith, who is a longtime senior, one of our, I don't even want to call him an elder, I like to call him a brother, you know, instead of relegating him to some elder group or whatever. But he is out in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he has been in the game for an extremely long period of time. And he has taken myself and Jenna and Ross and you know, Mandala Rich down there. He's taken us under his wing and really taught us a lot and given us a lot of exposure. And I always want to make sure that I mention him in the context of our practice and our learning as well. So he's a special individual.
Well, thank you for taking that little extra time. Morgan, there it is. We're going to do the gear dump, check your pocket challenge. You know, you have an interesting question about your bracelet being an EDC tool. I guess that's coming from the Elite family.
No, these are actually, these are from, so I spent some time in the northern part of India called Gujarat, you know, and this bracelet, they call it skara or kara.
Correct.
And a lot of times, like kind of warrior people in that area wear this one. This one was gifted to me. And usually they wear it on the sword arm, on the weapon arm.
Makes
so
sense.
Kind of protective, but it also has to deal with like a cyclical relationship between like the physical and the divine. So it also kind of relates to that element as well.
You see, I thought he was being funny. And I'm so glad he asked the question because you've enlightened us just a little bit more. Thank you for taking the time, family. Thank everybody who's viewing in. Brother Njoli, love you, man. And we want to continue this conversation again in the future.
Yes.
Folks.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Rasa Angola Nafari saying loyalty, wisdom, respect.
Life, health, and success.
And we'll see you again next Saturday.
Happy Mother's Day to all the moms.
And happy Mother's Day to all the moms.
Happy Mother's Day.
It's such a blessing to have this beautiful mother, great warrior on this show. So we have to honor all the warrior mothers that are training right now as well. Peace and love, family.
All right, take care.